The film opens in Tampa, Florida, where a police officer finds a car parked on a dark road and discovers Vincent Goldberry burying his son's body. The officer arrests Vincent, and forensics uncover a life-sized wooden Pinocchio alongside the body. 5 years later, Jennifer Garrick, Vincent's lawyer, argues for a reduced sentence, claiming he was wrongly convicted. At home, Jennifer's daughter Zoe struggles with nightmares, and Jennifer tries to comfort her. The next day, Jennifer receives a package containing the Pinocchio puppet and other case materials. At the jail, Vincent confesses to the murders of other children, but insists he only buried the puppet with his son because it was the child's favorite toy. Jennifer believes Vincent knows the real killer, but is protecting them. Meanwhile, Zoe is bullied at school and lashes out. At therapy, she refuses to talk about her dreams. Jennifer faces frustration with Zoe's behavior and enforces a punishment, but later finds herself overwhelmed with worry. In court, the judge denies the request to reduce Vincent's sentence, and the death penalty stands. Jennifer confides in a priest about her struggles, and her colleague Barry reminds her that evil takes many forms. Later, Jennifer drives to prepare for Zoe's birthday party and is startled to find Pinocchio in the back seat of her car. At the party, Zoe insists on keeping the puppet, and Jennifer reluctantly agrees. Afterward, Zoe tries to convince Sophia and Jennifer that Pinocchio is real. That evening, Dr. Edwards meets with Zoe, who confesses her fear of losing her mother's boyfriend. Jennifer returns home and gives Zoe a belated birthday gift, asking her to return the puppet. Zoe reacts angrily, claiming she doesn't want to lose Pinocchio as she did her father. Later, she hears footsteps in her room and finds the puppet standing beside her, agreeing to let it stay for the night. The next morning, Jennifer learns that Zoe brought Pinocchio to school despite knowing it was meant to be returned to the office. Jennifer also discovers that the doll Zoe originally wanted is now damaged and hidden under her bed. At school, Zoe is bullied by Beth and her friends, who throw Pinocchio over the fence. Zoe finds the doll beside a rake and asks it what it's doing. But when it doesn't move, she peers through the fence and spots Beth riding her bike. She looks back at the puppet and the gardening tool next to it, and a thought begins to form. As Beth rides by, the rake handle gets in her way, causing her to fall in front of an oncoming bus. Miraculously, she survives, rolling under the bus. Zoe emerges from behind the bushes with Pinocchio and runs away. Back at the public defender's office, Jennifer jokingly accuses her boss Barry of placing the puppet in her car, but he seems confused by the suggestion. Before he can respond, Jennifer receives a call from Dr. Edwards and rushes to his office. The therapist advises Jennifer not to separate Zoe from the toy, as it has become a source of emotional attachment for her. On their way home, Jennifer confronts Zoe about bringing the doll to school and the incident with Beth. Zoe claims Pinocchio was only protecting her from Beth, who was jealous of her birthday gift. That night, Jennifer gets caught up with work and has to stay late. Sophia, the babysitter, asks for a day off, so Jennifer arranges for her boyfriend David to take care of Zoe. While babysitting, David hears Zoe talking to herself in her room, seemingly having a conversation with the puppet, which is motionless by the window. In Zoe's mind, Pinocchio speaks to her, warning that if anyone finds out they are talking, they might take him away and he'll never become a real boy. He also suggests that he can get rid of her mom's boyfriend so they can be a family. Later that night, Zoe realizes that Pinocchio is missing and searches the house. David, now aware she is awake, asks her to return to bed, but Zoe insists that the puppet has gone to the basement. When David searches the basement, the lights go out, and he begins to suspect it's a prank. He heads back upstairs, ready to scold Zoe, but as he approaches, someone shuts the door in his face. He stumbles down the stairs, injuring his head, and loses consciousness. He is later taken to the hospital, and Jennifer learns that Zoe called 911 after the accident. Zoe angrily confronts the unconscious David in her bedroom, demanding to know if he hurt her mom's boyfriend. Although David doesn't move, Zoe hears his voice in her mind, but when the headlights of a passing car cast a shadow on him, it appears as if his nose has grown, leading Zoe to believe he's lying. Pinocchio, however, brushes off her suspicions, claiming that her mom will have more time for her now that the nanny isn't around. Concerned about what might happen next, Zoe catches a cricket in the garden the next morning and shows it to Sophia, hoping it will give Pinocchio a conscience. Sophia warns her about the puppet's temper, citing the original story, where Pinocchio crushed the cricket. Later that day, Dr. Edwards meets with Zoe again, but has to leave the room. As soon as he's gone, Zoe explodes in anger, blaming Pinocchio for the accident. The puppet asks if she's sure, as she wasn't there to see what happened. Zoe, seeing his head and mouth move, becomes agitated and yells at him, just as Dr. Edwards returns. That night, Zoe is told that David is stable, but she panics, afraid that she'll be blamed for his accident. She cuts Pinocchio's strings loose, as he requested, and sneaks out to follow him. Pinocchio tells her he will take the blame for what happened at the hospital, and someone later disconnects David's life support, causing him to flatline. The next day, Dr. Edwards shows Jennifer footage of Zoe talking to her immobile puppet at the clinic. He suggests committing Zoe to a mental facility for treatment, but Jennifer refuses. When she arrives home, she confronts Zoe about her muddy clothes. Zoe tearfully admits she went to see David the night of the accident but didn't make it to the hospital. Instead, she went home, but she believes Pinocchio might have gone there on his own. Exasperated with her daughter's lies, Jennifer takes Pinocchio away and locks him in the trunk of her car. The following morning, she instructs the babysitter Sophia to look after Zoe, who won't be going to school. Later that day, Jennifer visits the local priest and shares her growing concerns with him. She now believes that Vincent's son was responsible for the deaths of the children, and the father only stopped the boy to protect him, taking the blame for the tragedies. Jennifer entertains the possibility of a malevolent force hiding within objects, like the puppet, manipulating people into committing dark deeds while everyone else thinks they're simply losing their minds. Meanwhile, at home, Zoe worries that Pinocchio might harm her mother, but Sophia reassures her, claiming the puppet now has a conscience. Zoe remembers the cricket and rushes to her room to check on it, only to find it squashed. Terrified by the discovery, she screams, startling Sophia and causing her to drop her glass. In her panic, Sophia rushes to Zoe's room, only to have a fire poker jutted out from the doorway, striking her legs. She trips and falls, and someone repeatedly strikes her head. By the time Jennifer arrives home later that night, the lights are flickering and the house is eerily dim. As a lightning storm rages outside, Jennifer investigates the strange silence, eventually finding Sophia in the hallway, lifeless and bleeding. Zoe suddenly appears, but when she sees her mother, she runs away. Jennifer chases after her and finds her in the living room, asking what happened. As Jennifer looks around, something strikes her head, and she collapses to the floor. As her vision blurs and spins, she finally focuses and sees Zoe holding a bloody fire poker. The sobbing child assures her that everything is safe now that she's taken the poker from Pinocchio. Zoe flees again, and Jennifer, desperate to find her, notices something standing in the dark corner of the room. By the fireplace is the wooden puppet, its eyes locked on her as it turns its body toward her. With a horrifying scream, Pinocchio lifts his arm to reveal a sharp knife. Terrified, Jennifer runs for her life as the demonic figure chases after her, calling for her death in a voice that sounds like a distorted child's. Jennifer escapes into a room, slamming the door behind her, but the puppet stabs through it, injuring her hand as she struggles to keep it shut. She calls for Zoe to get out of the house, but the hallway falls silent. Jennifer peers through the door, and someone suddenly shoves it open. Losing her balance, she barely recovers before being attacked again by the puppet. She manages to shake him off and stumbles into the living room, hearing Zoe cry out for help. Pinocchio pounces in front of her and tries to stab her. In a final act of desperation, Jennifer hurls the puppet onto a table, shattering its glass top into pieces. Slowly, she approaches the aftermath of their struggle, but is baffled to find Zoe amidst the shards and the knife, not the puppet. Exhausted and stressed from the night's events, Jennifer collapses onto the carpet. The next day, Zoe is committed to a mental institution in Tampa, Florida. In her room, she stares coldly into space, while her mother talks with Dr. Edwards. The doctor explains that they will keep Zoe sedated until she is deemed ready for treatment, as she poses a danger to others. Jennifer argues that it wasn't her daughter trying to hurt her, but something else, Pinocchio. Dr. Edwards insists that, due to the darkness and the concussion Jennifer sustained during the attack, her perception of the events may have been skewed. Jennifer remains firm in her belief that what she saw was real, but when asked if she saw the wooden figure move before or after her head injury, she can't answer. Jennifer tightly embraces Zoe and, as a public defender, vows to do everything she can to get her out of the institution. Dr. Edwards, however, hopes Jennifer fails for Zoe's sake.